What happens when the greatest logical mind in human history encounters an invisible, irrational enemy? Meet Kurt Gödel, a revolutionary figure in mathematics and logic, who boldly proved that some truths can never be definitively verified. While his intellect soared, his grasp on reality became increasingly fragile. In his later years, paranoia took root, a haunting fear that his food was poisoned, leading him to depend on his devoted wife, Adele, to prepare and taste every meal before he would dare eat. Tragedy struck when Adele suffered a stroke, leaving Gödel without his protector for 6 long months. Alone against his fears, he succumbed to paranoia, withdrawing from sustenance altogether. When she finally returned, it was too late. The mind that reshaped universal logic had been undone by the demons of his own making. The man who weighed 29 kilograms, 65 pounds, became a haunting reminder of the delicate balance between genius and madness. What if a world-changing scientific breakthrough only happened because a genius was too shy to correct a minor paperwork error? In 1908, James Chadwick went to the University of Manchester fully intending to major in mathematics. But fate had a chaotic twist. He accidentally stood in the wrong registration line, ending up in an interview for the physics department instead. Chadwick was so intensely introverted that he couldn't bring himself to speak up and tell the interviewer he was in the wrong room. He simply accepted the mistake. That single moment of social anxiety changed history. He stuck with physics, discovered the neutron, and clinched the 1935 Nobel Prize. The anxiety that unlocked the atom. A wrong line changed the course of physics forever. The brilliant Greek mathematician Pythagoras possessed one of history's most bizarre obsessions, a total irrational phobia of fava beans. He strictly forbade his followers from eating, touching, or even walking near a blooming field. He believed these legumes held the trapped souls of the dead. Legend claims this obsession turned fatal. While fleeing from a violent mob, he reached a flowering bean field. Rather than trample through it and survive, he stopped, refusing to violate his sacred taboo. He surrendered to his pursuers, who promptly ended his life. Was it a medical precaution against favism or a spiritual delusion? History remains divided. Famed author Hans Christian Andersen was, by all accounts, a nightmare house guest. In 1857, he was invited to stay at Charles Dickens' home for a week or two. He ended up staying for 5 grueling weeks. He was notoriously needy, emotionally volatile, and deeply irritated the entire Dickens household. He bored the children, constantly wept over negative press, and required constant coddling. When he finally departed, Dickens plastered a note on the guest room mirror. Hans Christian Andersen slept in this room for 5 weeks, which seemed to the family ages. Dickens never saw him again, effectively cutting all ties. Some friendships simply cannot survive the weight of a desperate house guest. Not all pirates were obsessed with gold bullion. Bartholomew Black Bart Roberts, one of history's most successful and ruthless pirates, capturing over 400 ships, ran his fleet like a strict military operation. He enforced a rigid, eccentric dress code. During an 18th century raid, rather than looting only the cargo, Roberts specifically targeted the crew's wardrobe. He commanded his men to plunder every single hat on board, forcing the captured sailors to surrender their headwear. Roberts was not just seeking riches, he was a style-obsessed tyrant. He demanded his crew appear sharp, viewing their appearance as a tactical intimidation weapon. From hundreds of kilometers, miles across the Atlantic, the feared captain prioritized fashion over fortune. Imagine gifting an empire a masterpiece of pure artistic genius, only to cause an imperial panic. In 1857, Queen Victoria was presented with a massive plaster replica of Michelangelo's David. But upon laying eyes on the magnificent, raw, 12,000-pound biblical hero, Her Majesty was utterly scandalized by his unapologetic male nudity. To rescue the monarch from supreme awkwardness, a staggering, proportionally accurate plaster fig leaf was hurriedly commissioned. Equipped with 2 strategic hooks, this emergency shield was kept in absolute readiness, waiting to be frantically hung over David's genitals whenever the Queen or other distinguished guests paid a visit. In the mid-19th century, New York Philharmonic concerts faced an absurd sonic crisis. The fashionable pastime of knitting became so widespread in the audience that the rhythmic click-clack of hundreds of needles, some measuring 25 centimeters, 10 inches long, began to drown out the orchestra's most delicate passages. It was a literal knitting orchestra competing with the musicians. The noise became so disruptive to the performance that the Philharmonic was forced to issue an official, desperate plea for patrons to stop knitting during the music. It was a bizarre era where the sound of woolcraft threatened to silence the masters, turning classical concerts into a duel between symphonies and sewing. When William Herschel discovered a new planet in 1781, he bypassed classical mythology entirely. To honor his royal patron, King George III, he officially proposed the name Georgium Sidus, or George's Star. Imagine looking through a telescope at a frigid gas giant located 2.8 billion kilometers, 1.7 billion miles, from the Sun and calling it George. Unsurprisingly, astronomers outside of Britain detested the name, finding it absurd to name a celestial body after a mortal king. After intense debate, it was rebranded as Uranus. Had the original name stuck, our solar system map would look drastically different today. In the early 1910s, American parents found a bizarre loophole: mailing their children. When the U.S. Postal Service launched Parcel Post, it set a 50-pound, 22.7-kilogram limit for packages. Remarkably, no regulation strictly defined what constituted mail. Parents quickly realized they could buy stamps, pin them to their child's clothing, and hand them over to mail carriers for delivery. While mostly used for short distances, it remained technically legal until officials finally intervened. This wasn't just a rumor. It was a bizarre, documented reality of American postal history. Emperor Hirohito, a figure whose reign spanned the tumultuous era of World War II, held a surprisingly whimsical secret. Despite his status as a living deity, his favorite everyday accessory was not a royal heirloom, but a mass-produced Mickey Mouse watch. Gifted to him in the 1970s, this humble timepiece became a constant fixture on his wrist. When the emperor was laid to rest in 1989, he was famously buried wearing it, creating a baffling final contradiction for one of history's most complex and scrutinized rulers. The world's most iconic bubblegum wasn't a calculated branding masterclass. It was a fluke. In 1928, accountant Walter Diemer was experimenting with gum recipes at the Fleer Chewing Gum Company. While perfecting the formula, he realized the base was gray and unappealing. He scanned the factory for food dye to make it marketable. The only color he had in abundance was pink. He used it, and Double Bubble was born. The color stuck, creating a global standard. Today, that singular accidental choice has defined the aesthetic of a multi-billion-dollar industry for nearly a century. A serendipitous mistake that changed candy history forever. In 1958, Chairman Mao Zedong launched the Four Pests campaign in China, identifying sparrows as a public enemy for eating grain. Citizens were mobilized to bang pots and pans, forcing birds to fly until they died of exhaustion or to destroy their nests. The campaign was terrifyingly efficient, and the sparrow population in China was nearly eradicated. The result? An ecological catastrophe. Without sparrows to control them, locust and insect populations exploded, devouring crops across the nation. This, along with other failed agricultural policies, triggered the Great Chinese Famine, resulting in millions of deaths. It remains one of history's most chilling examples of how ignoring basic biology can lead to absolute disaster. If I'm ever tempted to think I'm smarter than nature, I'll just remember that the birds were actually doing us a favor by eating the bugs. Turn on your original Xbox, head to the dashboard, and listen closely to the ambient audio. Beneath the digital hum, the designers buried a chilling secret. Faint, garbled snippets of real transmissions from NASA's Apollo missions. These aren't just random static. They are the actual voices of astronauts and flight controllers captured during space missions decades ago. Hidden as an Easter egg by engineers, these ghostly echoes from the void have been floating in your living room for years. In 1968, a Soviet nuclear sub sank 5,000 meters, 16,500 feet, deep in the Pacific. The Soviets couldn't find it, but the US did. The CIA desperately wanted its secret codes, but lifting a 2,000-ton sub from 3 miles down was impossible. So they staged an insane cover story. They hired eccentric billionaire Howard Hughes to pretend he built a high-tech ship, the Glomar Explorer, to mine deep-sea minerals. No one questioned a billionaire's weird hobby. In 1974, the ship lowered a giant claw and grabbed the sub. Halfway up, it broke apart, but the CIA still snagged a critical piece. Now that is how you flex a bank account. In 1994, Jeff Bezos launched his online bookstore with the name Cadabra, a magical reference to abracadabra. However, the startup almost immediately hit a lethal branding roadblock. During crucial phone calls, investors and partners repeatedly misheard the name, thinking he said cadaver, the medical term for a dead body. Imagine trying to build a global empire when your company name sounds like a morgue. Realizing that cadabra was a business death sentence, Bezos pivoted to Amazon, taking his inspiration from the largest river on Earth. It was the right move. Cadaver Prime just doesn't have the same ring to it, does it? In 1910, just 7 years after the Wright brothers' first flight, Theodore Roosevelt cemented his status as the ultimate adventurer by becoming the first U.S. president to take to the skies. Climbing aboard a rickety aircraft designed by the Wrights, Roosevelt soared over the fields of St. Louis, Missouri, for a flight lasting roughly 4 minutes. Having previously led the Rough Riders in a charge up San Juan Hill, the former president famously declared the flight to be the bulliest experience of his life. He traded the horseback for the propeller, proving that even at the dawn of aviation, no elevation was too daunting for a true pioneer. Honestly, I'm just impressed he didn't try to wrestle the plane mid-flight. The 20th century holds a terrifying, often ignored reality. Your own government was far more lethal than any foreign invading army. Historians define this as democide, the calculated murder of unarmed citizens by their own state. While industrial-scale warfare ravaged borders, internal policies from regimes like Stalin's USSR, Mao's China, and Pol Pot's Cambodia executed more civilians than all international conflicts combined. This isn't just a political footnote. It is a profound historical anomaly where unchecked power transformed statecraft into a machinery of mass extinction. It seems the most dangerous weapon on Earth isn't a bomb, but a bureaucracy. In 1973, an armed convict named Jan-Erik Olsson walked into a bank in Stockholm, Sweden, took 4 employees hostage, and kicked off a brutal 6-day standoff. He demanded over $700,000, a getaway car, and the release of a notorious bank robber. To survive the grueling 131-hour nightmare in a cramped vault, the hostages did something completely baffling. They bonded with their captor. They grew to violently distrust the police, actively rejected rescue attempts, and even protected Olsson with their own bodies when tear gas flooded the room. After surrendering, the hostages refused to testify against him and actually raised money for his defense. Talk about a very intense group project. In 1993, a company hatched a dystopian scheme to launch a massive, reflective billboard into orbit. They aimed to make it appear as large as the full moon, visible to millions across thousands of kilometers. Global outrage was instantaneous. The audacity of commodifying the heavens ignited a fierce political backlash. The US government acted swiftly, signing a law banning space advertising forever. Today, the cosmos remains the final frontier, truly free from marketing, untouched by billboards. The stars belong to everyone, not the highest bidder. Thank God, I really don't need to see a soda commercial while staring at Mars. Think your morning after hangover is bad? In the Aztec Empire, a night of heavy drinking could literally cost you your head. The Aztecs viewed pulque, their sacred agave beer, as a strictly ritualistic drink, and public drunkenness was an unforgivable taboo. For commoners, a first offense meant getting your head publicly shaved while a mocking crowd jeered at you. But if you were caught staggering a second time, the penalty was death by strangulation or beating. For the nobility, who were expected to set a flawless moral example, there were no second chances. They were executed on their very first offense. The only exception? Citizens over 70 years old, who were legally allowed to drink as much as they wanted. Getting carded in Tenochtitlan wasn't about proving you were 21. It was about proving you were old enough to survive the night. Four millennia ago, in ancient Mesopotamia, a furious customer named Nani reached his absolute breaking point. A merchant named Ea Nasser had sold him a batch of copper ingots. The problem? It was complete garbage. Instead of high-grade metal, Nani received a substandard delivery, and to make matters worse, his messenger was treated with total contempt while trying to pick it up. In a fit of pure rage, Nani didn't just yell. He meticulously chiseled his fury into a small clay tablet using Akkadian cuneiform. When archaeologists excavated Ea Nasser's house, they found a literal archive of complaints from other scammed buyers. It turns out that getting ripped off by a sketchy businessman is literally as old as civilization itself. Imagine being so monumentally bad at your job that your bad reviews survive for 4,000 years. In February 1971, Apollo 14 astronaut Edgar Mitchell became the 6th person to walk on the moon, spent over 9 hours exploring the lunar surface, and collected 43 kilograms of rocks. But his true cosmic shock came on the 380,000-kilometer journey home. Mitchell experienced a profound spiritual epiphany that redirected his life toward the paranormal. Years later, the NASA hero shocked the world by publicly claiming that peace-loving aliens had repeatedly contacted Earth, even intervening at nuclear test sites to prevent war, and that governments have covered it up for decades. While NASA firmly denies the claims, this top-tier scientist went to his grave convinced we are not alone. I guess looking at Earth from space really does make you realize your neighbors are definitely weirdos. In 1992, German toxicologist Svetlana Balabanova stunned the scientific world when she tested the 3,000-year-old remains of Egyptian mummies. The chemical analysis returned results that seemed completely impossible: distinct traces of nicotine and cocaine. Both plants, coca and tobacco, were native strictly to the Americas and supposedly completely unknown to Africa for another 3 millennia. Did ancient Egyptians pull off transoceanic trade voyages spanning thousands of kilometers long before Columbus? Mainstream archaeology says absolutely not, pointing to modern contamination, fake artifacts, or look-alike old-world plants. If they actually crossed the Atlantic just to restock their stash, that is a legendary level of commitment to a party. Think clogged arteries are just a penalty for modern life? Think again. When scientists ran CT scans on over 50 ancient Egyptian mummies, they uncovered a shocking truth. Nearly half of them suffered from advanced atherosclerosis, the hardening of the arteries. The most extreme case? Princess Ahmose Mariette Amon, who lived 3,500 years ago. Despite walking everywhere and eating a lean, fast-food-free diet, 2 of her main coronary arteries were severely blocked. Today, she would have needed bypass surgery. It turns out that whether you are a modern office worker or an ancient pharaoh, humans have always been hardwired for heart disease. I guess even the most golden empire can't save you from your own genetics. In the early 1980s, NASA committed one of the most painfully ironic bureaucratic blunders in history. Faced with a severe magnetic tape shortage for its Landsat program and facing budget constraints, the space agency decided to recertify, degauss, and reuse thousands of old reels. Among the roughly 200,000 tapes erased were the 45 original high-resolution slow-scan telemetry tapes of the 1969 Apollo 11 moonwalk, the single clearest recording of humanity stepping onto another world. While lower-quality TV broadcast copies survived, the pristine, uncompressed master recordings are gone forever, permanently fueling conspiracy theories. Imagine telling your grandkids you accidentally taped a satellite weather report over Neil Armstrong. For over a century, Japan existed without a legally defined national flag. While the Hinomaru, the iconic white banner with a crimson sun, was used for generations, it was never formally codified by law. In 1999, the government finally passed the Act on the National Flag and Anthem to resolve this. Contrary to viral internet chaos stories, the flag wasn't radically redesigned. It was standardized. The law officially centered the sun disk, which had often been slightly offset, to appear perfectly aligned when fluttering on a pole, and clarified the proportions to a 2:3 ratio. This bureaucratic fine-tuning wasn't a scandal, it was simply the end of a long-standing legal fluke. It is a pervasive myth that science was solely a man's world. While history books often spotlight male figures, the truth is that women have been fundamental to groundbreaking discoveries since the dawn of time. For centuries, systemic barriers, denied education, blocked access to institutions, and stolen credit kept brilliant female minds in the shadows. Many women worked in secret or saw their life-changing findings published under their husbands' names. From Marie Curie, the only person to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different sciences, to Ada Lovelace, who authored the first computer algorithm, women have always been equal architects of our progress. Wait, if women invented half the stuff, does that mean I can blame my messy desk on historical gender roles too? Asking for a friend. For centuries, artists unknowingly painted with the dead. Mummy brown was a pigment made from ground-up Egyptian mummies, prized for its rich, transparent glaze. During the 19th century Egyptomania craze, the demand became so grotesque that mummies were looted, torn apart, or crushed by the ton. Beyond art, these remains were cruelly repurposed as fuel for steam locomotives and even ground into fertilizer for European crops. The industry only collapsed when artists finally realized the horrific origin of their supplies, leading some to hold ceremonial burials for their paint tubes. A haunting intersection of art, colonial greed, and utter desecration. If I'm ever struggling for inspiration, I think I'll stick to crayons. At least they don't come with a hauntingly historical existential crisis. In 1936, the Soviet Union constructed one of the most bizarre machines in history, a functional computer that ran entirely on water. Created by Vladimir Lukyanov, this analog behemoth was a complex labyrinth of interconnected pipes and chambers. Instead of electricity, it used hydraulic pressure to process data. By adjusting water levels in specific chambers to represent numerical values, it could calculate complex differential equations, a feat that was revolutionary for the time. This massive system stretched across entire rooms, using flow rates to perform advanced math. It was effectively a liquid-based brain for engineering. In the chaotic 1350s, long before he overthrew the Yuan dynasty to become the first Ming emperor, Zhu Yuanzhang was a starving rebel soldier. Imprisoned and left to die of hunger by a paranoid commander, his life hung by a thread. Enter his wife, Lady Ma. Driven by absolute devotion, she secretly stole freshly baked, scalding hot, steamed buns from the military kitchens. To smuggle them past armed guards, she pressed the blistering bread directly against her bare chest. The buns were so hot that they permanently scarred and burned her flesh, but she successfully kept him alive. When he took the throne in 1368, he made her his empress and remained fiercely loyal. Talk about a woman who is literally willing to burn her chest to save your life. Before 1914, the world functioned largely without modern passport controls. For centuries, travelers crossed continents with minimal documentation, relying on social trust rather than digital bureaucracy. The outbreak of World War I shattered this era, as nations rushed to track citizens and secure borders to prevent espionage. What began as a temporary emergency measure post-1914 hardened into our current, rigid system. It wasn't a natural evolution of society, but a reaction to global conflict that permanently transformed how humanity moves across the map, turning our own planet into a series of gated communities. If I'd lived back then, I could have just walked to another country. Now I need a passport, a visa, and a prayer just to go on vacation. Ever wondered why a week is 7 days long? Who decided that anyway? It isn't just arbitrary. It's a celestial inheritance from the ancient Babylonians. Over 4,000 years ago, Mesopotamian astronomers tracked the 7 wandering celestial bodies visible to the naked eye: the sun, the moon, and the 5 known planets: Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn. These were considered divine entities, influencing human destiny. By aligning their calendar cycles to these 7 cosmic wanderers, they institutionalized the week. While other cultures toyed with 8 or 10-day cycles, the Babylonian 7 dominated, eventually becoming the rhythmic heartbeat of global civilization. A legacy written in the stars, quite literally. If I'd known my weekly deadline was just the result of ancient sky watching, I'd have a much harder time blaming my procrastination on the modern grind. How did ancient civilizations survive when winter turned the world into a frozen wasteland? It wasn't just about huddling by a fire, it was a desperate battle against thermodynamics. Communities relied on complex insulation techniques, like lining walls with animal furs or layering sod to trap heat. They mastered the art of food preservation, using fermentation, smoking, and freezing to bridge the hungry gap. Until spring. In regions with heavy snowfall, like parts of the Middle East, they even engineered primitive drainage systems to prevent melting ice from flooding their homes. Every winter was a high-stakes test of engineering, planning, and raw human endurance. If I think my modern heater is a lifesaver, I'm clearly just a spoiled brat compared to our ancestors, who treated staying alive as a full-time, high-pressure job. Before the advent of modern maps, humanity relied on the stars to traverse the globe. Ancient travelers, such as those crossing the Arabian Peninsula, mastered the art of celestial navigation, using constellations as their compass. By observing the position of stars like Polaris, they could accurately determine latitude and direction across vast, featureless deserts or open oceans. This was not merely guesswork. It was a sophisticated scientific discipline. Stars were not just lights in the sky, they were reliable, unchanging guides that enabled explorers to journey thousands of miles without a single paper map, proving that human ingenuity has always looked to the heavens to navigate the Earth. If I tried to use the stars to navigate today, I'd probably end up in the neighbor's backyard. I guess I'll stick to my phone's GPS for now. Before currency, humanity lived in the complex world of the barter system. It wasn't just trading things. It was an intricate social game where value was subjective. Imagine trying to trade a goat for a bag of salt. You needed a partner who wanted your goat exactly as much as you needed their salt. This double coincidence of wants was the biggest hurdle to global trade. To solve this, civilizations adopted commodity money, items like salt, shells, or cattle that held universal value. It was a chaotic, high-stakes market where your wealth literally walked, grazed, or sat in a sack. It was the ultimate test of negotiation, survival, and sheer human ingenuity long before the digital wallet ever existed. If I had to carry a live goat just to buy a loaf of bread today, I think I'd just start skipping breakfast. My living room is definitely not zoned for livestock. When did humans first decide they wanted, not needed, clothes? It wasn't just a sudden whim for style. It was a desperate, primal survival strategy. As our early ancestors migrated out of the warm African cradle into harsh, frigid climates thousands of years ago, biology alone wasn't enough to withstand the bite of winter. Anthropological evidence suggests that humans began crafting rudimentary garments from animal hides roughly 100,000 to 500,000 years ago, or perhaps even earlier, to shield their skin from freezing winds. What began as a life-or-death necessity for warmth eventually evolved into a complex social language of identity, status, and eventually the modern, relentless pursuit of fashion. If I'd lived in the Stone Age, I think my OOTD would just be whatever hide didn't get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. Talk about a minimalist wardrobe. During World War II, Allied forces built remote airstrips in the Pacific. bringing unprecedented cargo, medicines, tools, and food to isolated islands. Indigenous groups witnessing this abundance concluded it was a gift from their ancestors. When the war ended and the planes stopped, they desperately tried to lure them back. They built runways, airplanes made of bamboo and thatch, and even bamboo control towers, waiting for the gods to return with more supplies. It's a tragic, fascinating psychological phenomenon known as a cargo cult. It's a haunting look at how rapidly human cultures can interpret alien technology as divine intervention, blurring the lines between magic and mechanical reality. If I ever have to build a giant bamboo airplane just to get my Amazon packages delivered faster, I think I'll officially know I've lost the plot. Think your tattoo artist uses cutting-edge gear? Think again. The blueprint for the modern tattoo machine traces back to Thomas Edison. In 1875, he patented the electric pen, a device designed for duplicating documents. It used a tiny, vibrating needle to puncture paper, creating a stencil. Fast forward to 1891, and Samuel O'Reilly realized this exact mechanism was perfect for skin. He modified Edison's invention, creating the world's first electric tattoo gun. It was loud, heavy, and essentially a modified office supply, but it revolutionized body art, transforming tattooing from a slow, manual labor of hours into a precise, high-speed craft. If I ever have to get a tattoo with a modified doorbell, I think I'll just stick to a very cool-looking sticker instead. Petrichor isn't magic, it's chemistry. Coined into 1964 by scientists Isabel Baer and Richard Thomas, the term describes the earthy scent produced when rain falls on dry soil. The magic is actually a compound called geosmin, released by soil-dwelling bacteria called actinomycetes. When raindrops hit the ground, they trap tiny air bubbles that shoot upward like microscopic aerosol sprays, launching geosmin and plant oils into the air. This scent is so potent that humans can detect it at concentrations as low as 5 parts per trillion, more sensitive than a shark detecting blood in water. It's not a Greek god's blood. It's an ancient sensory connection to the earth itself. If I'm that sensitive to the smell of rain, I think I've officially reached human bloodhound status. Don't mind me while I sniff the horizon for a thunderstorm. In 1900, the British governor of the Gold Coast, Frederick Hodgson, walked straight into the Ashanti Empire and made the most disrespectful blunder in colonial history. He demanded to sit on the golden stool, an object so profoundly sacred that it was never allowed to touch the ground, let alone a British rear end. While the male chiefs trembled in fear, one 60-year-old woman had absolutely enough. Queen Mother Ya Asantewa stood up, grabbed a gun, fired it into the air, and told the men to trade their loincloths for her underwear. She took command of a 5,000-soldier army and laid siege to the British fort for months. Turns out the British wanted a throne, but got a war instead. Think medicine is a modern luxury? Stone Age humans were performing trephination, drilling holes into the human skull, thousands of years before modern anesthesia. Archaeological evidence from Europe to the Americas shows that ancient healers were cutting into bone to relieve intracranial pressure, treat traumatic head injuries, or perhaps exorcise what they believed were malevolent spirits. Remarkably, many skulls show signs of bone healing, proving that patients frequently survived these primitive, terrifying procedures. It wasn't just survival. It was a testament to humanity's ancient drive to conquer death itself, using little more than sharp stone tools and raw, unflinching human grit. If prehistoric people could survive brain surgery with nothing but a sharp rock, I think I can officially stop whining about my mild headache. Ancient Egyptian men had periods. Ancient Egyptian men were often plagued by what appeared to be menstruation. Papyri record them suffering from regular, painful bleeding, a phenomenon that deeply puzzled them. The truth was far more grim. They were infected with Schistosoma hematobium, a parasitic flatworm lurking in the Nile. By swimming in these waters, they contracted schistosomiasis, which causes chronic urinary bleeding. It wasn't a biological quirk, but a parasite that treated their bodies like a breeding ground. They didn't have periods. They were battling a silent, microscopic assassin that defined the limits of their health in the ancient world. If the price of a dip in the Nile was a parasitic infection, I think I'll stick to my bathtub. At least the only thing swimming in there is my rubber duck. In 1926, Canadian millionaire Charles Vance Miller died and left behind the ultimate post-mortem troll. Having no heirs, his ironclad will declared that the bulk of his fortune, worth millions today, would go to whichever Toronto mother could pop out the most babies in the next 10 years. This sparked the chaotic Great Stork Derby. Desperate for cash during the Great Depression, families aggressively bred for the prize. Ultimately, 4 mothers tied with 9 kids each, winning $110,000 each. The government spitefully forced 3 of them to pay back their welfare relief directly from their winnings. Miller likely did it to mock the legal system and protest Canada's strict anti-birth control laws. Now that is how you ghost everyone. Imagine waking up to find everything you know about driving is completely wrong. In 1955, an overwhelming 83% of Swedes voted against changing the side of the road they drive on. The government completely ignored them anyway. On September 3, 1967, they executed Dagen H, flipping the entire country from left to right-hand traffic. At 4:50 a.m., all cars had to stop, crawl over to the right, and wait 10 minutes before driving again at 5 a.m. Journalists expected a bloodbath, but they got an anticlimax. Just 157 minor accidents and 0 deaths. Why? Absolute, pure paranoia. Terrified drivers crept along at 25 to 40 kilometers per hour, 15 to 25 miles per hour. Insurance claims plunged by 40%, but by 1969, confidence returned, and accident rates climbed right back to normal. So if you want safer roads, just make everyone completely terrified to drive. The German ENIGMA was the ultimate uncrackable cipher machine, boasting 158 quintillion possible settings. It looked like a standard typewriter, but it completely revolutionized battlefield secrecy. Nazi commanders were entirely convinced its codes were flawless. But its brilliant inventors made one devastating, mind-bogglingly stupid design error. A letter could never encrypt as itself. If you pressed A, the machine could output any letter in the alphabet except A. This single predictable blind spot gave legendary British codebreaker Alan Turing the exact leverage he needed. By hunting for routine daily phrases like morning weather forecasts or the mandatory Heil Hitler, Turing's team built the massive bomber machines to systematically eliminate billions of wrong combinations at lightning speed. This single engineering blunder essentially cut World War II short by an estimated 2 full years, saving millions of lives. Turns out, trying too hard to be unpredictable makes you perfectly predictable. Sir Isaac Newton could calculate the exact movement of planets, but he couldn't calculate human stupidity, especially his own. In 1720, Britain was swept up in the South Sea Bubble, a massive financial scam masquerading as a world-changing trading company. Newton initially bought shares early, made a tidy 100% profit, and wisely cashed out. But as he watched his less intelligent friends get obscenely wealthy overnight, pure, unadulterated greed took over. He went all in at the absolute peak of the bubble. Months later, the market crashed, wiping out £20,000 of his wealth, worth over $4 million today. Broken and bitter, he banned anyone from saying the words South Sea in his presence. Turns out, gravity isn't the only thing that brings things crashing down hard. In 1872, two ragged prospectors walked into a San Francisco bank with a sack of rough gems, claiming they found a secret mountain of diamonds in the American West. The city's elite investors went wild with greed. To be safe, they sent a sample to Charles Louis Tiffany, the legendary founder of Tiffany & Co. He confidently declared them genuine and worth $150,000, about $3.8 million today. Relieved, the tycoons handed over $600,000, over $15 million today, to buy out the scammer's claim. But the entire field was a lie. The cousins had literally bought cheap industrial diamonds and low-grade rubies in London, then scattered them across a 200,000 square kilometre, roughly 77,000 square mile, patch of dirt on the Colorado border. The scam imploded when a brilliant geologist noticed that diamonds and rubies naturally never grow in the same geological matrix. Turns out, a legendary luxury jeweler can still be a total amateur. In 1785, Jean de Valois Saint-Remy pulled off history's ultimate heist. Knowing a wealthy cardinal desperately wanted Queen Marie Antoinette's favor, Jean forged letters from the Queen asking him to secretly buy a massive 2,800-carat diamond necklace. She even hired a prostitute who looked like the Queen for a midnight rendezvous in the Versailles Gardens. The cardinal fell for it hook, line, and sinker, handing over the jewelry. Jean's crew immediately pried the 647 gems apart to sell on the black market. When the bill came due, the public blamed the innocent Queen, shattering the monarchy's reputation and fueling the French Revolution. Talk about a window of opportunity gone completely wrong. During the Cold War, East Germany's secret police, the STASI, perfected a terrifying psychological warfare tactic called Zersetzung, literally meaning decomposition. Instead of arresting dissidents and creating martyrs, they systematically destroyed their sanity from the shadows. Agents secretly broke into targets' homes just to pull off subtle, mind-bending stunts. They would move furniture a few centimeters, swap their coffee brand, change an alarm clock, or slash a tire. The victims slowly lost their minds, completely isolated and utterly convinced they were insane because there was zero evidence of a crime. And you thought your roommates were bad. Before it became a household name, YAHOO was just a hobby project run out of a trailer. Founders Jerry Yang and David Philo weren't just picking a random word. They created a sophisticated acronym. Yet another hierarchical, officious oracle. They chose this because their early web directory was designed to organize millions of pages across thousands of kilometers, all into a strictly hierarchical structure. They jokingly called it officious because it was essentially a busybody, sorting and categorizing the entire chaotic internet. It's hard to believe that such a massive tech giant was named after a tongue-in-cheek jab at their own database. And honestly, I'm just glad they didn't name it yet another random directory of internet junk.
From ancient brain surgery to atomic discoveries born out of pure social anxiety. If there's one thing these facts prove, it's that history isn't made by perfect, pristine figures. It's driven by human flaw, raw obsession, and pure coincidence. Which of these moments blew your mind the most? Drop your favorite in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories from the past.